I found myself at Charing Cross looking after a serial of cops who'd just been bombed again. You're going to the temporary mortuary, and it was chaos because it's so horrific. Bodies had been reduced to almost non-human form. Some couldn't be identified. There's no fresh air down there. Warm, very uncomfortable. Bodies were decomposing on a bit of a rapid rate. I was asked to start taking the deceased through to a family viewing area. Apparently Dad's come into view. Just lost his wife to cancer, and this was his only son. Being a new dad, I just sort of threw away that police in armour. All I had in my head was that card.
Thanks to you, our listeners, we've entered the top 10% of podcasts globally. You can help this podcast be seen by more people. You can do this by following the Pocket Sergeant podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, dropping us a review, leaving a rating, and hitting subscribe on YouTube. Today's guest is someone who's taken personal trauma and turned it into purpose for the benefit of others. Gary Hayes is a former British Transport Police officer and a founder of PTSD 999, an organisation supporting emergency service personnel and their families living with post-traumatic stress. During his time in the job, Gary faced some of the darkest moments imaginable, including working in the aftermath of the 7/7 London bombings in 2005, when 4 coordinated suicide attacks on London's transport network killed 52 people and injured more than 700. Out of those experiences came PTSD 999, which is now helping countless emergency responders get the specialist support they need. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having us, Paul.
Gary, you served in the British Transport Police from 2003, I think it was. What brought you to policing originally?
Dare I say, a lot of bullying from friends, guys I'd served with in the military, always telling me that I sort of make a good copper. My wife was a serving Met officer. When I joined, she had been in the Met then for somewhere around 12, 13 years. So obviously I sort of had a bit of a, dare I say, input into what it was like to be within the police service itself. But I just really wasn't prepared or ready to make that leap. I was doing a lot of other sort of stuff and enjoying that, having the freedom to do really what I wanted. But eventually, a good friend of mine who was a serving officer within the British Transport Police informed me that they were recruiting, and dare I say, I filled in the forms. Within a matter of months, I've been accepted as a rather mature student.
Right. So how old were you?
I was about 33, I think, when I started the training process. It was strange going back to a schooling environment, especially with a lot of younger colleagues who were joining different forces around the southeast, and it was just I did feel a little bit out of my comfort zone, to be quite fair, but we just sort of got on with it.
So I touched briefly in the intro about the 7/7 bombings, but you joined in 2003. Can you tell me about your policing journey then? So you've got into the job, what you did up until that point?
Yeah, so like every officer up and down the country, you've got that 2-year period of probation. So it was a lot of input, a lot of puppy walking, and sort of just going out and experiencing my new working environment with or without a tutor constable. And as I was sort of getting close towards the end of my sort of tutorship, my probationary period, I was doing a lot of plainclothes stuff up and down on the network, which was really opening my eyes to a world that I would suggest I really wasn't aware of, and the implications of policing it, and I sort of thoroughly enjoyed it. And then basically, just got into being a police officer on the rail network. I started off on the London Underground. I was based in East London, sort of policing the areas that I was both born in and lived in. Again, interesting from that perspective, because you get to know the good people and the not so good people that live sometimes rather close to your doorstep, which didn't bother me. But it was just an enjoyable period. We'd sort of got ourselves ready for a lot of stuff within the BTP. I was just joining our new anti-terrorism team when, unfortunately, 7/7 happened.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Like the build-up to any sort of act of terrorism, obviously from the terrorist point of view, there's a lot of preparation goes into what they were doing, and policing is the same. Security services are the same. There's a lot of awareness, and it's just being in the right place at the right time. Unfortunately, on this time, obviously, we weren't able to prevent that incident from taking place. However, I was actually on paternity leave. My wife had just had our third son, and thankfully he came a bit earlier than predicted, because had he come on a due date, 7/7, we worked out to a very fine timeline of around a minute or so that my wife would have been on the Aldgate train, as her police post was Holborn Police Station at the time, and she would have gone to work as she'd done with my other two boys, and just wait for nature to take its course and start the labour process. But as I say, thankfully he came early. On the day itself, I received a phone call from the wife asking me if I was aware of this power surge on the rail network, which I wasn't. I was actually in Tesco's buying some nappies. I couldn't have been any further away from work than where I was. I told her that I'd speak to her again in a moment. I phoned a colleague up, and he just said to me, "Mate, get your grab kit. We've just been bombed," which was a little bit of a shock. And then it was simply followed by standby. We've just been bombed again. So I sort of knew that I wasn't going to be able to get into London, because the network was going to be closing down, as were the phone masts, etc. So I got back into work the following day, obviously aware of what had been reported by the media of that day's events. I found myself at Charing Cross looking after a serial of cops, and it was chaos.
Do you not think we were prepared for anything like that?
No, I don't think you can ever be prepared for something like that, because purely by its nature, it's an act of terror. It's caught everyone off guard. They achieved their aim clearly. Sadly, as you mentioned in the prelude to this, 52 innocent people lost their lives. Many, many more were injured, and thousands more people were impacted by the day's events by purely being within the network, or being part of the emergency services or the NHS, dealing with those awful injuries that were sustained by the members of the public.
So you've talked about having your own serial, having your own group of cops there. What was your role during the
So
aftermath?
I was an acting sergeant, and I was just placed, like a lot of colleagues, into London to try and maintain some sort of air of calm. Obviously, to remain very vigilant, because there was a strong suspicion that there could be further attacks or follow up attacks, and we just needed to reassure the public. Equally, obviously, the network wanted to keep running as best it could. So we were there just to be calm, put some intervention in when we had to, and just really step up the general policing duties on the day. I was there for 2 days, and then one of my governors just came up and just went, "Oh, you're ex-military." Like, well, from a long time ago. Yeah, good. You're going to the temporary mortuary, because everyone that we've sent there thus far are falling over because it's so horrific. And I
And
just thought to
because you
myself, do you
and
know what?
because you're ex-military, that makes you more suited than anybody else.
Allegedly. I just thought to myself, I'd heard stories in the short 2 days that I'd been at Charing Cross. You know what it's like.
What rumours and stories had you heard?
Just the nature of what was being asked of people and officers to do. That the victims, if you remember, had been on those specific four crime scenes for a number of days. It was very hot, as we've just experienced this nice little summer that we've had again. So unfortunately, for those that were below ground in tunnels, obviously there's no fresh air down there. Very warm, very uncomfortable, and you've just got a horrible mix of a very unpleasant atmosphere down there. So bodies were decomposing, I would suggest, on a bit of a rapid rate. So when they were being eventually brought to the mortuary to start that identification process,
How many cops are we talking that would be involved in this?
oh blimey, if I can sort of say, on the site there must have been, I would suggest, 100 plus officers on site, each with a specific role. So the search officers that were at the crime scenes were doing their part in recovering the deceased, clearly with dignity and professionalism, and they were being brought to the mortuary. So going back to my sort of elevation to going to the mortuary, being a good ex-thinking rifleman that I was, I sort of said to my governor, "I'm not going down there. I've heard these rumours of how awful it is, the condition of the victims, etc. I don't really want to be part of that."
Where these rumours come from? Have this come from the
Just, you
cops
know
that
what
were
it's
on the
like,
ground?
for sure. People that were taking the deceased to the temporary mortuary at the Honourable Artillery Company, and rumour control, you know what it's like. People say stuff and it just expands into a nonsense with very little sort of, dare we say, body to it. And I just said to my governor, look, you've got to be a sergeant to go down there. And he was like, again, congratulations, Sergeant Hayes, off you go. And that was me for nearly 2 months.
Describe that. Where was it? Where was it?
So it
And
was in East London, the Honourable Artillery Company, which is part of the reservist army. It's a huge barracks, a massive barracks. In fact, when I left the regular army and I joined the reservists, my same regiment in the Royal Green Jackets, we used to go over there for training, for fears and whatever. It's big enough to have Chinooks come in and pick you up and take you away to training locations. So it's a huge area. So as I went through the main gates, I was greeted literally as I looked on what was the football pitch and a big running track by this huge tented area. There was lots of cops in and around the perimeters keeping the security, and equally the buildings that surrounded the mortuary. I believe that the cops were placed up there to prevent the media from getting in and trying to get those awful shots of the deceased being brought into us. So I went into a specific part of the mortuary where we had 4 pods, which represented each crime scene. We never had adequate refrigeration or freezer units to place the deceased in. So again, even for us, as you can imagine, it was very hot, very uncomfortable, and we would just get gowned up in the white suits, double gloved, and off we'd go into one of the specific pods to start that identification process with colleagues that had realistically just come back from I think, the tsunami. They were just finished in
oh wow,
the wrapping up of that. So they'd gone from one extreme to the next. So for us, it was a huge learning curve. I dealt with fatalities at that point. So, I'm not going to say I was not used to seeing bodies in various states, but this was something quite extraordinary, given all the component factors, dare I say, of the heat, the blast injuries, and whatever else was in the tunnels.
so when you walked into the tent, what exactly did you see? How was it all laid out?
From memory, we had an open area within the main tent where we could sort of have a bit of downtime, just sitting on the grass, or we had a few chairs brought in for us. But then in front of us, it was like something out of a film set where you have these 4 pods that were quite big in size to place the deceased in. And, as I say, we had no refrigeration. So it was it was unpleasant.
What was going through your head during that time?
Um, I think a lot of emotion sort of safeguarded myself in relation to not wanting to know who the victims were. I know that sounds a bit callous, but to me, they just were going to be a set of digits that followed the UK DVI books or the Interpol books, because if you start getting wrapped up in who the individuals were and what they were doing, I know for a fact it would have become overwhelming. So already, I think the Sun newspaper had printed these grainy little pictures, passport style pictures of the perceived victims. But again, I just, on the route into work, for want of a better word, I wouldn't look at the papers. I wouldn't sort of even look at other people reading the papers, because that's all you saw were these alleged victims. And the first bag that we opened, which was going to determine whether I was going to stay on situ or in situ or not. And I must admit, I wasn't prepared for what I saw.
What did you see?
And it's undescribable. Bodies. Well, this specific individual had been reduced to almost non-human form in relation to decomposition, the severity of the blast injuries, and then equally maggots and flies. I would suggest I have a very unhealthy hate now for flies. These flies, I kid you not,
Takes
were
you back to that day.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. There's lots of stuff that has stuck with me from that period. But it was a job, and as a police officer, my role in my eyes was to serve and protect. So I was hopefully serving the families of the deceased whilst protecting the deceased that were with us, because that was my job to look after those people, to ensure that we got them back to their loved ones as quickly and as professionally as we could. Ensuring that we'd identified them 100%, because you couldn't afford to make mistakes.
So talk me through the process then. So you've gone into the tent, into the pod, opened the bag, seen what you've seen. How from there do you carry on with your role? What's involved?
So, from again, sadly, having sort of dealt with fatalities on the railway, there's that initial search again, seeing if there's any items to identify that individual that are on that person in situ. And then we would just start that process of swabs, clippings, trying to get some form of DNA that we could then obviously build that bigger picture to who that person was, where they come from, and enable other parts of the team to then go out and do their job. The flows, the detectives, building up a picture for each individual. And we would do our utmost to give them as best the information that we could. It was a very slow and laborious process, but for the right reasons. And again, once we got the first one out of the way, for me, it was just sort of like having dealt with my first fatality on a railway. Yeah, very unpleasant, something you never forget, but you need to remain professional.
Professional,
In my mind,
methodical, I guess.
absolutely. Every bit of, dare I say, your policing skills that you had to that point, albeit mine only 2 years in, I was putting into practice. And I became very passionate about the fact that, whilst I didn't want to know who these individuals were, as I described earlier, I wanted to do my level best to ensure that these people were given back to their families, and with the right information. And that was as much as we could do, really. But it was a very slow and long process. There was not only were we doing what we were doing, there were other components within the little tented city that we were in who were doing equally as important work in identification. Some couldn't be identified, so we was having some top pathologists come in and doing their stuff. It was an amazing environment to work in. It was horrible, but also equally as interesting as you watch the process of the deceased coming to us, and then that slow but delicate and professional move from their arrival to hopefully their repatriation to their funeral directors and their families. Each day didn't get any easier, it got tougher and tougher.
How long were you
And
there for?
just under 2 months. They were quite long days. You could spend hours just on one individual.
I mean, I don't know how you can process something like that. So you go in one day, but then they're getting you go back for 2 months. What happened? What happened when you got home? Did you share any of it with your family or?
Um, so again, my wife just had our third son. Our other two little boys were little, 7 and 5, and then a newborn. Clearly, having worked long days and then coming home with our unsympathetic public, because all they want to do is get about and do their business and get to work and get home. But obviously, the bombings had thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. So, I'd stand on the tube going home, listening to people moaning about the inconvenience. And, I just think to myself, I wish you could have spent 2 seconds with me. I was going home in sort of like half blues, t-shirt, and just like work trousers and boots. And I actually confronted a group of builders who were just really Um, they were punching me buttons, and I just sort of said to them,
What
like,
were they?
you know,
What were they doing? What were they saying?
to me, there was no thought for the victims. All they were concerned about was the fact that they couldn't go and have their beer, they couldn't get into work, it was costing them money.
So basically, just a big inconvenience.
Yeah, and what a shamble the police in response was to that event. And, I'd had, on this day, I'd had a particularly long day, unpleasant. And I just confronted these guys. And all of a sudden, it was like the old Wild West films when a goodie or a baddie walks in through the saloon doors and everything sort of stops. Everyone on the train just looked at me. I must have raised my voice clearly. And I was explaining to them, look, just keep it down. I'm not interested. And more importantly, you're really pissing me off. And
Yeah.
I've had a long day and I don't want to
Did
hear
you
it.
did you tell them that you were a cop and what you'd been doing?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it's sort of the whole train carriage then just sort of looked at me. And it was just like, I'm not going to say it was uncomfortable. I was tired. I was coming home to a new baby that clearly didn't want to sleep, needed feeding, and the wife needed looking after, and the other two kids, and all that. A lot of people were being put up in hotels, but some of us, there was no room at the inn, dare I say. So some of us were having to go home. And yeah, it just sort of I got home, and the wife sort of was like, what's the matter with you? And I sort of explained, but I didn't talk about my day at work. It was just the journey home. And apparently on that evening, I didn't go to bed. I just sort of spent time holding my new baby son and going between sort of our room and the other two boys' rooms. I just, couldn't sleep, couldn't settle. And it was time to give the little fella back to make my way back into London again and start the whole process. And that's how it was. It it was an amazing effort by everyone that was involved. But for me, it was at that time I obviously didn't realise it. It was going to be the start of a very dark and difficult time in relation to my mental health.
So what impact did the experience have on you?
We sort of narrowed it down, well, many years later, by a trauma focused therapist. That on one day I was asked to start taking the deceased through to a family viewing area, as you'd find at your local funeral directors. I would liaise with the family liaison officers. They would ask the questions, you know, how far can the family go if they wanted to remove the shroud from their loved one and whatever. And I'd try and be as delicate as I could, and say, well, potentially no lower than the sort of collarbone because the rest of it is either not there or it's absolute mess. Again, these people were sets of digits, and everyone in the temporary mortuary, both the police staff, because it was a very multicultural environment, different forces. We was all pulled together to do specific jobs. We had civilian mortuary staff in there as well, and everyone was first names and nicknames. And on this one specific day, I'm taking through a young gentleman, and the one of the mortuary assistants, he just went, "Me, old Sarge," and you just go, "Oh, fuck, this is going to be something I don't want to hear." And she went, "No, this is really sad." And I was like, "Yeah, I know they're all sad," and I'm trying to get past her with a gurney. I was under a bit of time frame to get this gentleman in. And she went, "Oh, apparently Dad's coming to view. Just lost his wife to cancer, and this was his only son." So for me, it was, it took me breath away a little bit because I'm a new dad again. I've got two other little boys indoors. You know,
Becomes real again then. They're not a
oh,
digit. It is actually real.
without a doubt. And I know a lot of us don't like to admit it, male or female officers, but underneath that cloak, we have got hearts and we are human beings with feelings. For me, I was had all manner of things going through my head. I took the fella in, liaised with the flow, um, had a quick chat, and about 10 minutes later, the flow came back out and he said, "Oh, Gaz, from Dad, can you pass on his thanks to everyone that looks after his son? And to you, he's really grateful for what you're doing." So I'm like, "Okay, yeah." I went back in the room. My intention was to, as I've done with others, put cards, gift, and flowers and whatever had been left into the body bags, and then taken back, zip them up, taken back to their place of rest. On this occasion,
It's
excuse me,
okay. It's okay. Just take your time.
I caught sight of what this gentleman had written on this bereavement card, and wow, just blew me away. And I sort of broke all the protocols, and I left the body unattended for a couple of minutes. I just had to get out.
What did the card say?
Think of what you might write to your son. And I'll just leave it at that. Excuse me. I went back in to the room, did what I had to do, and then sort of just had to get my shit together.
Just going back to that card, do you
Mm.
think that is the moment where for you it's become real? This is real. This isn't just a
Yeah.
number. This is real. This could happen to me. It could happen to anybody that I know. And did it just really hit home?
Yeah, because, being a new dad, I just sort of threw away that policing armour that we all sort of throw around ourselves. And yeah, the thought that my wife could have been on that Allgate train, I could have lost the wife and an unborn son. And there's all those connotations. Thankfully, clearly, it never happened. And we were lucky. Unfortunately, 52 people weren't, and hundreds of others.
But going back to like the dad, he's just lost his son. Well, he's lost his wife before, he's lost his son, and he's still saying how good a job the police officers and the civilian staff are doing.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it? It's you've got that one aspect of going home and listening to people moaning about the response from the emergency services in relation to the actual event itself, and then dealing with the aftermath. And then you've got something so out of the park. This gentleman being so courteous, having lost everything, and you just think to yourself, "Wow, policing's it's a funny old game, should I say it, because you see the good and the bad and the indifferent." And I think once I got myself together, when I took this young gentleman back to his place of rest, and it took me the rest of the day just to keep focused, because the next job that I went on, all I had in my head was that card. And, I never understood it at the time, but I'd been hit with vicarious PTSD, on top of other traumas. So the vicarious side of it, years after the event,
Yeah,
is simply vicarious post traumatic stress is basically this. You don't have to be at the scene of that traumatic incident, i.e., up to, dealing with something very, very traumatic. You could be sat indoors watching it on the news. You could read it in a newspaper, and yet it still affects you. So, for my state of mind at the time, new dad, new baby, 3 kids, this poor gentleman, no wife, no kids.
that was a tipping point.
Yeah. But being the alpha male that allegedly I was, and, you know, everyone used to sort of come and lay their stuff down on my shoulders, and it was, cause that was my job again. You spent all your time looking out for your team, for your colleagues, and you put yourself at the back of the queue. And I found out later on how destructive not talking was going to be, because it eventually cost me my job, and I almost went to take, well, I attempted to take my own life because I'd lost everything. There was a sort of a moment of realization then that through my time in the police service, especially the BTP, there was nothing in place to get you through all of the fatalities and all the other associated traumas that as police officers that we deal with.
So there was no support at all, no counselling,
No,
and you thought
if I was to,
nothing.
if I was to say to you that the day I finished at the mortuary as it was being wound down, if I remember correctly, that was a Thursday, I was at Snaresbrook Crown Court on a Friday with a job. I was given the Saturday off, back to normal duties on the Sunday. And it took our lot about, oh, I don't know, 7 or 8 weeks to realise that we'd not had a debrief. We were then sent to a hotel in the West End of London where we went into a basement conference room, and there must have been 40, 50 cops in there. And this poor lady who was allegedly going to start this debriefing process. And I just sort of put my hand up and asked if this was going to be an individual basis or a collective. And she went, "Oh no,
Yeah.
it's for everyone. We're going to all sit through this in this room this morning and go through." I thought, fucking ain't. And
Mm.
I got up and she asked where I was going. I said, "Well, I'm not prepared to sit here now and go through this nonsense." With that, my team got up with me and followed me out the door, as did a number of other officers. And we went to the local pub and debriefed ourselves in there. And that really was it. We had the Met Police, the counter-terrorism commander, was unable to come and meet us all. We were all summoned to a public house in sort of, dare we say, central London. We were given thanks from the assistant commissioner, whoever it was, and basically informed that no one was to leave the premises until we'd eaten everything and drunk everything. And that was our, how can we put it, that was our official debrief. We succeeded in going through that pub like a plague of locusts. There was nothing left to eat, and there was absolutely nothing left to drink. And that was it. It's back to normal duties.
You talked about not talking in the very early stages, and then you'd gone on to say it eventually cost a number of things, including your job. Can you tell me about what led up to you leaving the police?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to joining the police, I've been in the military. As a young kid, I was subject to sort of incidents of child abuse. So, early 70s, it's the classic babysitter. Mid 70s was followed by the classic football coach scenario. And I, along with a number of other young kids in the team, was abused for a number of years by our coach. Never spoke to anyone because you didn't speak, you didn't talk about that sort of stuff because of all the connotations that came with it and what the perpetrator had obviously said to us as well. So I had a bit of an issue around trust. So I never used to speak to anyone, and I became quite a determined young individual. If I was going to do something, I was going to do something. And I equally, if I felt I needed to challenge something or someone, I would, irrespective of who they were or their age. So I held on to that for all that time. Got through the military, had a great time serving in the Royal Green Jackets back in the day. Fantastic regiment, great bunch of lads. But weakness was something that was never shown. And you would certainly not talk about how you were feeling, no matter where you've been or what you've been doing, because it was of its time, dare I say. And again, you didn't want to stand out as being the weak one.
Yeah, and you're a
So,
man, and which would
exactly,
have made it no doubt a lot harder as well.
absolutely. You're leading men in the military, you're leading men outside of that environment in different working areas, and then you're a police officer that all of a sudden everyone is drawn to because you're a bit vocal, for want of a better word, and you stand up for yourself. But one thing you certainly wouldn't do is put your hand up and say, "I can't do this anymore," because again, we put all these huge barriers up around our own mental health and well-being. It's ridiculous. Throughout my career, talking about incidents that I dealt with, and sadly, there were far too many suicides on the railway that we dealt with. And for us, it would be the call would come in, and you would turn up to the job with as much information as you could glean from your control room, and invariably it would just be you and your colleague, or just me. I would have to determine whether it's a suspicious or non-suspicious job. I'm under pressure because the railway needs to be up and running again. There's again, no thought for the deceased. It's all about business. We were under strict timelines.
So you're not talking. You don't trust people enough to do the talking, and
No,
you experienced trauma previously as well.
yeah.
How did that then affect your behaviours and things?
Yeah, for me, it manifests itself in what I would suggest now was an addiction. I started drinking, and I was drinking like I was an 18-year-old squatty again. Back in the day, I could drink till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, go to bed for an hour and do a 10-mile run. Didn't bother us.
Yeah.
A lot older, not as wiser, but equally, the thought of actually talking to someone, having a little bit of black humour between myself and colleagues, that was as far as it ever went. If we had a horrible fatality, and they were all horrible in their own right, we'd have to even deliver the death message as well. So, you know, not only have I had to get down onto the track, retrieve the deceased person, I've then got to identify them. Sometimes a colleague would be able to escort the individual to hospital, to the local mortuary, and I would get that information and take that information with me to the bereaved family. And, delivering that message. Anyone who opens the front door after a knock to find a uniformed police officer, it normally
Mm.
indicates bad news. So you've got to, take all that on board as well. So it's a lot. And the only way I could stop my nightmares and my flashbacks, and, even down to my tolerance of people at that time, it was ridiculous. So drink was
What were you having nightmares and flashbacks about? What were they specific nightmares, recurring
a
ones?
lot of yeah, a lot of it was around this young man and the card, the bereavement card.
Yeah.
But equally, you know, things were popping into my head then, from the childhood abuse to as recent as the day I'd gone to bed, having come home from work, and then, things would just pop into your head, outrageous stuff. But the dreams were so vivid and so real. I mean, it got to a point where I was actually vomiting because I could taste, smell. I was back in the moment, and it was just the weirdest thing. And even after a period of time where I realised that my drinking was becoming a major problem, um, and I really cut back. I did my best to sort of really slow that down. But the vomiting started, and my wife thought I was just 24/7 drunk, and it caused a lot of a lot of destructive behaviour in the family from myself. I was becoming a right pain. The impact on my wife and my kids was immeasurable.
How did your behaviour change? How were you being a pain?
I was very short tempered. You've got two young boys in their primes of their childhood, and they couldn't even breathe or move without me shouting or screaming at them. You know, I just, my wife, she would say stuff, and she was a child protection officer, so she was, dealing with stuff at another level. But it just everything was how can I describe it? It's almost like getting a match, striking it, and then touching the blue light paper and just waiting for it to go. And that's how it was in our house. We could never go to London to take the kids out because, as far as I was concerned, everyone was going to try and blow us up. I'd seen so much stuff from a counter-terrorism point of view. And one thing that really always leapt at me, and it still does even now, was the Madrid train bombings. Awful, awful incident, but it was done in such a precise manner. It was just bloody horrible. I was so hyper vigilant, and my wife would say it looked like I was just going to fight everyone, and I didn't recognise it. I just was out to look after my family, my children. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that when I was at work, especially say football duties, I would sometimes try and encourage to get involved in a punch up with football fans, hooligans, whatever you want to call them. The more vocal element of the undesirable side of football, and it was the only way I could get this pain out of my body was to physically get involved in something. And If I couldn't do that, I'd just go back home after the shift and drink again. It was a horrible revolving wheel. It was just one that I just simply I couldn't get off, and I couldn't reach out at work because there was certain stuff that I was involved with that had I put my hand up and said I can't do it, then it would have been very restrictive on me to sort of further different sort of, dare we say, skill sets. And you see it in today's policing when we deliver our presentation, especially for the firearms boys and girls. The last thing they're going to do is go, I can't do this anymore. I need some intervention, because that's their firearms ticket withdrawn. That's a huge cut in pay, because they're working 24/7, then boys and girls, because they haven't got the coverage. So they're earning bucketfuls and overtime. But dare I say, to their detriment. So again, it's everything that we build up, that picture we put before ourselves in relation to our mental health. Who wants to be labelled as being mad, wibble, whatever you want to call it?
How did it snowball for you to eventually leave the police? So you've told me about the behaviour displayed so far.
So that was a continuum. That just went on from 2005. In 2012, I'd been a part of our specialist search team for the Olympics. Again, just being the professional officer that I believed that I was, I gave it 100%. And I came home from a 12-hour shift, and one of my kids said to me, it was my middle boy, "Oh, Dad, can we go to the shops? You want to get some sweets and whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And we went up there, and this incident just kicked off in front of me. And it's that horrible scenario. Don't ever get involved in something off duty,
Mm.
unless you really, really have to.
What what was happening?
It, so there was these two individuals. One lad, huge unit. This other lad that was with him, he had sort of like a massive swelling over one of his eyes, and I can't remember which one it was now. But they were talking about an assault. Someone had been hurt. And to me, given the state that these two were in and what they were describing, I perceived that a serious assault had just occurred. So I called the job in and gave a running commentary of the actions of these two, full description to the Met Call Centre. And, I was in shorts and flip flops and a t shirt, not a pleasant sight. And this job made its way towards my local underground station, which is a station that is overground at the sort of east end of the district line. And when a uniformed car came towards the station on the blues, these two made a run for it. And so I'm giving those updates, and they run up towards the station. The uniformed car went past, and then another car turned to, and these two young cops jumped out. And basically, I said that I was an individual that called the job in, and I asked that they didn't chase these two down onto the platform area of the station, because obviously their intent was to get away from police. Um, One of the officers was somewhat rude, so I then just had to play the old, "Well, I'm acting sergeant, blah blah," from the BTP. You will do as you're told. And with that, they chased these two through the paddles onto the platform. One of the guys jumped on the tracks in front of an incoming tube train. How he was not hit is beyond me. The train had to make an emergency stop, loaded with passengers, and this other individual was then fighting with these two uniformed cops, trying to push them onto the track. I left my son in the booking hall. He could see everything that was going on as I went down onto the platform area, got involved with trying to subdue this individual, and the result was that I had to punch this fella because he'd attempted to bite me a number of times, and then to get him down. We'd gone through the trespass gate, so there's not a lot of room for manoeuvre. There's not a lot of room for anything. No pleasantries. You've just got to get this guy contained and then away from the danger, including the officers and myself. Eventually, 5 uniform officers come down from the Met, and they took this individual away and placed him into a marked van. I gave a brief statement to police, said that I'd do a full MG11 the following day statement. and 17 months later, I'm gripping a rail at Crown Court for an ABH offence.
Ah,
Yep, my job threw me under the bus.
what injuries did he have?
Allegedly, where I'd punched him, he had numerous lacerations on the inside of his mouth and perceived bruising and swelling to his face. Now, when we got to Crown Court, I hadn't denied that I'd punched him. I'd done it because it was lawful and proportionate. When we got the disclosure bundle, within that, it was clear that Socko hadn't been sent to take injuries wrong photographs of his injuries. His girlfriend was allowed to do it on her mobile phone. He was a serial self-harmer, and I mean serial self-harmer. When he was in the back of the marked police vehicle, one of the Met guys had to call through and ask for the following to be put on the CAD report. Can you show for CAD that the DP in the rear of the vehicle is smashing his head so violently in the back of the vehicle it's causing the vehicle to move from side to side? You know,
What
my
happened to
job chased
court?
him for over seven. Say again, sorry.
What happened to court?
Oh, it was a farce. My job had pursued this individual for over 7 months to get a statement from him. At Crown Court, he basically stood there in his best tracksuit, was late, and just turned around in a very matter of fact way and said, look, you know, given the lifestyle that he had, he expected to slap off the old bill every now and again, which sort of, you know, I looked at the jury and a lot of my colleagues were in the room and some senior officers that I was friends with outside of the job, they were all there to support me. And I just looked at each other. It was incredulous that you would say something like that in Crown Court. And so that sort of set the tone. We had no professional witnesses coming in. The the area
So
around the
he's kind of saying there on its own, I was out of order.
yeah, yeah. To
I
to the
deserved it.
layperson,
I was out of
yeah,
order. Yeah.
yeah. I got caught, and that's what I knew was going to come my way. You know, the mere fact that he tried to throw these two young guys onto a live track, tried to bite me, didn't even factor into it. Anyway, the bottom line was that thankfully the judge could see where this was going. And this was, I was at Crown Court December 2013, a week before Christmas. And the judge, in his summing up, said, I'm going to send you home for Christmas. And basically, in between now and January of 2014, I want pre-sentencing reports. I'm going to send you to see a top trauma focused.
So you were found guilty.
I was, yeah, at the end. Yeah. Um, and obviously, because of that, I was then put into a situation where I had to resign from a job that I loved doing. I was given 105 hours community service, and I had to pay that individual 1,500 quid there and then in compensation. Otherwise, I was going to prison. When I saw this forensic psychiatrist in the interim period, his report basically said, "Look, you know, this officer acted completely out of character on this specific day because of his PTSD. For no other reason, that was it." And, you know, thankfully the judge, as I say, he was very much on my side. You know, lots went on within the courtroom. He even accused the two young coppers of colluding with their evidence, let alone the shenanigans of the poor old victim. And yeah, it was, dare I say, it was a very dark time. I had to hand in my warrant card and sort of went home with the knowledge that within the next 2 months I was no longer going to be a serving police officer. And it was during that period that I attempted to take my own life. I just couldn't bear the thought of all the shame, the guilt. I'd let everyone down. You know, people have put me on this bloody pedestal, and I just felt absolutely useless. You know, I couldn't even empty the bloody rubbish bag in the kitchen. You know, I pulled the bag out of the bin and some of the contents would fall out, and it was like, I
Mm.
can't even empty a bin. That's how low I'd got. And on this one specific day, I took my two eldest boys to school. I dropped the little fella around to his grandparents. Hadn't even contemplated sort of suicide in any sort of way at all. Because I, you know, I've dealt with far too much of it. I got in my car, And it was like throwing a light switch. Sod it, that's it, on the go. And then my life, I went to a place where I picked up a number of people from who have been successful, and I could see the train coming out of London, and it was just like all I had to do was literally stand up and take half pace forward. And I'll never forget sitting there, and I felt so calm. It's a really weird thing to say now, having sort of listened to other people's stories and read bits and pieces. It seems to be a bit of a common theme that you do have this area of calm, and you almost feel good because you know it's all going to stop in a minute. You've got no thought process for the aftermath of it, for the people that are going to come and pick you up, throw you in a body bag, um, and for your family. My God, you know.
But you're still here. You're still here. So, what happened after that moment then?
Well, as I say, the train was speeding towards me. I could see the driver. You know, I could just look, even there, thinking about it, I could see his eyes and the panic in his face, that poor man. Um, and as the train was virtually on top of me, I fell backwards rather than forward. I went home, told my wife what I just attempted to do. I had a bloody good cry, and it took me a week or so to just get myself together. And then a couple of months down the line, it was like there's nothing in place to help anyone, you know, who are struggling with trauma. Nothing. I feel as though I need to do something. So it's almost like putting my policeman's head back on again, getting back out there and amongst it, and doing my best to help as many people as we could. So we set up PTSD 999, and it sort of grew legs. And in March of last year, we went from a CIC to a fully registered charity, where we currently are at the moment. Um, we deliver presentations up and down the UK, Scotland, wherever people want us. We'll go and deliver our presentation to raise the awareness around the signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress, the impact that it has on an individual. Talking about vicarious post-traumatic stress, as we did earlier on in relation to reading a card or, you know, viewing images or whatever, and just breaking down those barriers and giving people, how can you put it, the tools to recognise the signs and symptoms, not only in themselves but in their colleagues or loved ones.
For officers and emergency workers that are listening, what are some of the early signs of PTSD that they should look out for?
The list is exhaustive. So if we could go from um, everyone or most people enjoy a drink. There's that one person in the group you're at work with who's the live wire, who always organises that after your last early turn. Let's get down and have a bit of a team drink and then get ourselves ready for a few days off. When that person stops doing that, there could be a number of reasons for it. But specific one might be the fact that they're struggling. They no longer want to be part of that team. They're starting to feel withdrawn. You know, isolation, guilt, they're massive impact factors around PTSD. You might see someone who, the summer that we've just had, you imagine going to work and you ask, oh, where's John today? Oh, he's got the flu. Who gets the flu when we've got 90-degree heat? It's little things like that that we don't realise that are building up in an individual. You might see someone doing excessive work hours. It's the only way they can cope with not being at home, not being around that family environment where they're clearly their behaviour is unacceptable, and it is becoming very uncomfortable and untenable to be at home, be amongst the family.
You were quite snappy at home as well, weren't you?
You know, even when we was away on holiday, we were fortunate enough to go to America, and our car broke down. We were stuck in the middle of nowhere. We was going to take the kids to see the alligators out in the glades, and eventually a recovery vehicle was coming our way. Now, my wife will turn around and say that I just went off on one at this poor individual, had stopped to speak to her to make sure she was all right because he could see the kids in the car. I was on the main road about 50 metres away from the car. And when I saw this car turn up, all I had in my head was the fact that he was going to do something nasty to my family. And I went running over there and he just sped off. And my wife screamed at me, what on earth are you doing? He was there, he was trying to help us and all that. And in my head, I just couldn't see anything other than he was going to do something. Do you know what I mean? And he wasn't. He was just there to help. So my perceptions and my hypervigilance was awful. So again, it's bits and pieces like that. You know, ask yourself what was your normal before you joined the job to what your normal might be now. It's a world of difference.
If you'd been trained in PTSD before you started behaving the way you did and thinking the way that you did, would you be able to identify that in yourself, do you think, or do you think it always takes somebody else to point that out?
It's a good question, and I think that the answer to that is twofold. It takes an amazing amount of strength for someone to accept their own vulnerabilities around their own mental health and to say, I can't do this anymore, I need some intervention. Equally, if you ask a colleague or a friend, are you okay? I've noticed your behaviour's been a bit different or whatever, they might just tell you to jog on. There's nothing wrong with that. Suicide this year amongst emergency services has gone through the ceiling. And I mean, it's been awful, because we don't have the tools to engage with our colleagues to recognise the signs and symptoms, and that's all we're trying to do now as a little charity is get into everyone. Whether it be, dare we say, the three named emergency services, police, fire, and ambulance, our prison services, our coast guard, our search and rescue, anyone that's involved as a first responder needs to have the input. You know, our support staff. I'm a great advocate now for, the forgotten heroes. Look at our call takers who take those awful calls from members of the public who are going through the most dreadful time. And we're on the radio wanting updates. We're actually pestering them to give us more information. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
they don't get time to decompress. They're then got to move on to the next job. Look at our officers in the security world, the counter-terrorism world, who are viewing those awful videos, imagery of people being maimed and blowing up and Christ knows what else. Even down to our sexual offences teams. My God, what release is there for them? So if we can introduce a basic level, you know, training the new recruits, and then those annual refresher courses that we all hate and have to do, even if it's online, if we can just be part of that and just to reinforce just some of the signs and symptoms that you might endure or see or even recognise within yourself, then it's got to be a bonus. We have saved lives since we've been PTSD 999, and we've got testament to that and testimonials via email and even a message on my phone where people have just called or just sent me a message saying thanks for saving my life. We was at an event last year, and we was at the same event this year where a cop and his wife came up, and his wife, I'd never met them before, and she just threw herself at me, broke her heart, and just said, I want to thank you for saving my husband's life. That was only through a phone call that I'd had with her, encouraged her husband to have a chat because I'm not there to judge. And I said it earlier on, a massive trust issue. I'm not going to phone up his firm and say, oh, Abigail who's just phoned me up. I would never do that unless there was a threat to life and I've got a duty of care. I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all these people calling us and just wanting to get stuff off their chest. They've never had the ability or the availability to do that with anyone. And, I'll make it quite clear. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a chronic complex sufferer of the condition with, dare we say, the added bonus of childhood traumas. So there's nothing anyone can say to me that's going to go, it's just like, okay, this is what I did to get myself through it. PTSD isn't curable, right? It's manageable.
What advice would you give to somebody who's worried about their mental health but feels too afraid or too embarrassed to speak up?
Give us a call. I'll make you laugh with my experiences, right? Nothing's too dark. Nothing is that bad that we can't talk about it. And unfortunately, when we say, I've got the t-shirt, I've got a cupboard full. All right. There is no shame in your mental health or how you might feel or perceive your mental health to be. Your mental health is as important as your physical health. Um, Clearly, at the moment, I'm not a good exponent of that. I've put a lot of timber on. However, at the end of the day, if we can just encourage men, especially, to talk, to show some emotion, there is no embarrassment around it. I cried during our presentation. There's a certain part that, excuse me, I have to revisit some stuff, and it kills me. When we first started doing it, trust me, I was very much aware of the audience, and it was so difficult not to get wrapped up in emotion in the moment. But now I don't care. If I'm going to cry in front of a room full of strangers, whether it be 10 or 120 people, I don't care. It's proven to everyone that trauma's trauma. It's very specific to you. Let's not overdress it for something it's not. It's specific, and PTSD has got literally its own diagnostic sort of criteria. Trauma is so individual and so specific to you. If you want to have a cry, have a cry. If you want to talk about it, talk about it. There's no shame. And honestly, you will feel a little bit better once you've done that.
Is there any specific work that you're doing for PTSD 999 that you're particularly proud of?
All of it.
And I
If
thought
I
that'd
could
be the
say
answer.
that, I'll be honest with you, Paul. I never thought that through the perception everyone had of me, and I'm going to sound a little bit selfish, I guess, now, the idea of the person I thought I was would be so impactful on people later on in my life. And as I say, we deliver this to all and sundry that want it, even to our security services. And the question that gets thrown at me more often than not is, this is a common theme. I've done 20 plus years in this specific role. Why have we not had this input before? It's brilliant. It's amazing. It's whatever. And the only throwaway I can give is I didn't go mad enough early enough in my career to have put this together, to get it out there, and to
Yeah.
stand in front of a room full of strangers, some amazing people, men and women, doing some incredible stuff, keeping us safe, and encourage them to open the door.
Do you get buy-in from police forces and stuff as well then?
Yep, we did. When we was a little CIC, we were going to forces up and down the country, so we wasn't just sort of a London-centric organisation as people often thought we were. A lot of our work was with the Met Police and the London Ambulance Service and the London Fire Brigade. Especially after Grenfell. Danny Cotton was the LFB commissioner at the time, and Danny invited us in to speak to her officers, and she did the most amazingly brave thing. She stood in front of a lot of senior officers while she was introducing us prior to our presentation, and told everyone in the room how she was struggling with her own mental health, which blew everyone away. That's come from the head of the London Fire Brigade. Danny is an incredibly brave woman, an amazing woman in her own right, and she's our vice president. And to listen to Danny talk, it's incredible. So that's all we try and do in our presentations. Wherever we go, we've got Graham Cole is our president, formerly from the Bill, who he
Yeah,
played
yeah.
Tony Stamp.
Familiar with him.
And,
Yeah.
people recognise Graham. And again, Graham, when he's talking to some of our audiences, when he's able to attend the presentation, he lets them know how proud he is of the service they've given, as I do at the end of my presentation. And I get moved at the end because I am so proud of everyone in that room, of what they're doing on a daily basis and the traumas they're facing, but with little help from their job.
How many people are part of the organisation?
So I've got a board of trustees, which currently sits at 5, employed now by my organisation, so I'm on a little salary. And I have a number of volunteers helping me equally. I've got an amazing lad who helps me out. He's still a serving Met officer. He does sort of the IT world for me and bits and pieces like that because I'm a dinosaur. I'm amazed that we're doing this bit of witchcraft now. You know what I mean? I'm useless.
Hey, you're doing a podcast. You're doing well.
Well, it's witchcraft. We're talking on a laptop and it's just, yeah, it's incredible. But yeah, so we're still a very small team, and I would like for us to be in a situation where I can employ more people, make this bigger, make this better, and get that awareness out there. That's my aim, and I will succeed in it. I don't care whose toes I've got to tread on.
The awareness and training aspect, then, can you just give us a quick rundown, a very brief rundown of exactly what is covered?
So we literally, from the moment we open the presentation with introductions, we show a short clip of a film that we did a couple of years ago with Graham called Broken Glass, which you can see on YouTube. We then go into the signs and symptoms, changes, perceived changes within an individual. We talk about vicarious post-traumatic stress and the impact that that has on individuals. We then move forward to sort of the middle ground of the presentation where we have a music video that we made with one of our other patrons, a guy called Dennis Stratton, formerly of Iron Maiden, back in the early days, played on the first two couple of albums. And the rest of the band are made up of young gentlemen who are children of emergency service workers. So we then move on into the second part of the presentation, which is around the London bombings and the aftermath and the impact that it had on individuals working within that area. So when you think about the beginning of the journey, we've opened up with a short story, shown the signs and symptoms, recognizing within yourself the importance of the acceptance of your own mental health. The music video is key because of the kids that are in the video. The second half is then talking about the London bombings, the aftermath, and equally the effect that a person suffering with post traumatic stress has on their family. We use some recordings of statements of the wife of a case study that we use and of the eldest son at the time of the case study. We then showed a film which, in a short 8-minute version, really takes in an hour and a half presentation because it's showing the signs and symptoms. If you've paid attention, you will recognise some of the signs and symptoms within the character that's being portrayed. We then revisit the case study, but nobody gets it. No one really sees what's coming. And then the video, and we talk about, the youngest person on the video giving a statement, how he hated his dad coming home, didn't know what dad was going to be there, blah, blah, blah. How frightened he was for his two brothers. Well, that's my oldest son who's playing guitar in the video. My middle son's playing the drums. He has PTSD as a result of my behaviour, and he had some medical intervention. He had scoliosis and had to have surgery rather rapidly. So combined, yeah. And then my nephew is a bass player. I met his dad whilst he was in the army. His dad followed me into the police. Similar scenario of not wanting to talk. So trauma again. And then we just sort of conclude with Q&A, which invariably no one's will put their hands up at that point because they don't want to shout in front of their colleagues. So I'll just move it on to the next phase, which is there's my details on the screen. Let's go and get a brew. Then I've got 140 people queued up in the corridor for a chat and
Oh,
a
that's
cuddle and a
brilliant.
cry.
Love that.
And but I think
Yeah.
what we do, Paul, is quite simple. We don't dress it up in big medical terms or use a lot of, dare we say, words that have no meaning. They're just used for that sounds important. That sounds, well, no, we just hit the ground running. Bosh, there it is. And it's a hard hitting presentation, but one I certainly wouldn't change and been told numerous times never to change it because it is so impactful. So that in a nutshell is our presentation.
So moving on to something a little bit lighter. Then we've talked about some of the horrendous things that you've seen during your time in policing.
Yeah.
Do you have any funny or outrageous policing stories from your time in the job?
I guess there was one incident we had in Cambridge and there was an event called Strawberry Fair. And it's almost like a festival weekend, live bands, and lots going on. And then clearly people need to get back home from the festival. There's one individual, a young lad, who had clearly overindulged in some extracurricular activities, was staggering towards us with, dare I say, hadn't wiped his nose properly. And he was just simply told, listen, fella, you ain't travelling. Go and sober up. and then come back. Well, he came back 2 or 3 times. It was a busy, busy time. And then on the last time that he walked towards us, it was like, "Here, Sarge, your best mate's coming back." And I just looked at him and I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to have you. You're going in the back of the van. He was duly put in the back of the vehicle, and I drove him away from the area. Almost a breach of the peace sort of circumstances. Opened the back of the cage and I said to him, right, out you get. Walk down that road, turn left, do another left, and eventually you'll come back to the station. I had no idea where we were. Honestly, I don't know Cambridge area at all. So, technically there could have been a kidnap there, I guess, for want of a better word.
He could still
And
be
about
he
three
could still
hours,
be out there.
this is the best part. About 3 hours later, my serial was we're getting ready to go back to London. Like, here, Sarge, look who it is. And up marched this fella. He come up, shook me by the hand, and went, "Thanks a lot, mate, for that." He says, "Probably the best thing that's ever happened to me." I was like, "Crack on, mate. Get yourself home." But I just couldn't believe that 1 minute he was stoned out of his head, next minute he's come back sober as a judge and thanking me for taking him out into the countryside.
Oh, that's brilliant. Love that. You you talked earlier about identifying yourself as a cop, with those two running towards
Yeah.
the railway and stuff. Was there any other times where you perhaps used your warrant card on days off?
Um, no, unless there was something of such a violent nature where you would have to get involved. I think I did it once for a shoplifter who was beating up security staff and I had to intervene and, just brief him and then just hold the fella down until the cavalry arrived. Um, but yeah, I mean, in my local area, people knew that I was a cop anyway, so, I didn't have to show out for that. But yeah, I never used to sort of just flash it about as some do, as a means of like, I don't know, defence or get me into somewhere that I technically shouldn't be in or whatever. You just talk to people, don't you, rather than rely on that bit of leather in your back pocket.
What are your hopes for PTSD 999 the next 5 years?
Oh, another great question. I hope that we find that magical bit of intervention where someone will buy into what we're doing, will support us, will guide us financially, and enable us to start contributing towards treatment for those officers that require it, and just build us from where we currently are. Operate from my kitchen. I've got an office space in Cambridge that I can use through one of my trustees. It's either I'm in my kitchen on the phone or I'm in my car driving up and down the country to give the presentations. As I say, I would like to be in a situation where we could employ more people and get specific people in. A good friend of mine, we served together in the military. He went on to do 28 years in the London Fire Brigade. He's great at delivering to the fire service. Why wouldn't I want someone like that? Because the firefighters recognise that, this chap was a former firefighter. Cops do the same with me. Ambulance service, same, whichever walk of life we look at. I would like to be able to deploy people and go, Bosh, get back in amongst it, give them your lived experience because that would enable them to go, yeah, I'm struggling. I need to have a chat with someone. And people are so relatable in that fashion that, well, I've done that job Gary's done. I've done a similar job, let's put it that way. I can relate to that. I know that he'll understand when I say to him, I can't I can't go to another barbecue because of the smells. I can't go to another big open area because it's going to be full of people that I feel might want to do me harm. I understand, and as would the people delivering the presentation. So again, it's about developing that bigger picture, raising that awareness, and having good people on board.
And finally, what would you say to someone who's listening who feels that they're just one moment away from giving up, like you were that day?
Don't, please don't. I would ask you to reach out to us. There are so many organisations that you could reach out to. But if you feel that you wanted to talk to us, then my phone number is on our website. It's my personal mobile number. When people call me, they'll speak to me. And if I miss the call, I'd always encourage you to leave a voicemail. Because what I found in the early days was I was ringing people back and I was asking how they were doing. And I was just being told, well, I was doing all right until you reminded me that I'd gone a bit wibble. So I don't call people now. I wait for people to call me and leave that voicemail. But please, please don't sit there and suffer in silence. No matter how bad it gets, there's always someone out there to listen, and that's us. That's what we do.
What's your website? What's your web address?
Well, that's a good question. It's www.ptsd-999.com off the top of my head. But if you just Google us on whatever, you'll find the correct information.
I'll research it and I'll put it on the podcast, all the podcast listings as well, so the audio and on YouTube, so people can click through.
Brilliant. I mean, as I sort of reflected earlier on, all this stuff's witchcraft for me, so I don't know how it works. I'm useless. I'm old. I'm a dinosaur. But yeah, you can just Google us and you can find us. And as I say, the email address on there is a support email address. You could either send an email into that location or send one direct to me. And it's just simply gary.hayes@ptsd999.org.uk. And I'll, respond from that point of view. But no matter how dark and uncomfortable things get, remember, we've all had similar experiences, and I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to listen and take you through those processes. And the hardest thing that anyone will ever do is make that first phone call. After that, I'm not going to say it's going to be a breeze, but it does get a little bit easier.
Love that. For coming on the podcast, I'm going to give you something as well. Give me a second.
Go on, mate.
Pocket Sergeant podcast mug.
Wow, amazing! Thank you so much.
Drop me an address where I can send it to. And you can have a few brews in that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Not long ago, I'd put it out to people online, suggest a guest, and multiple people suggested to get you on the podcast.
Really?
And I can see why. Yeah. And I can see why now. Yeah, so it's great, and it's going to help. It's going to help people.
I don't do pats on the back very well. I find it a bit overwhelming. But thank you to everyone that suggested us. For people like yourself, I can't say thank you enough for giving us the opportunity to again raise that level of awareness. What's not to say that one day we, like your podcast, can't go global. You know what I mean?
Apparently it's top 10% of all podcasts globally at the moment.
Wow, amazing. And if we can
Crazy,
just encourage people, yeah. But I think the big thing is, mate, that we live in an ever-changing world, don't we? And let's face it, it's gone a bit bonkers at the moment. But if we can encourage people to talk, we're saving lives, and I know that we are. And between this medium as well, it's a bigger outreach, isn't it? Just please don't sit there and feel that that's it, you can't do any more. Listen to your podcast. Listen to what we've spoke about today. There's always going to be someone there. If it's not us, there are other bodies out there that can help you. So please, just reach out and talk.
And a message to regular listeners as well on YouTube and other platforms. Please, please, please follow the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave a rating, leave a review, because all these things play a part in how many people can view the podcast and how visible it is. And we've got a lot of downloads, but we really want more people leaving reviews and following us, etc. Right, well, thanks again, Gary, for coming on.
No, thank you for having me.
Yep, we'll catch up soon.
Thank you so much, and keep up the great work. And for all your listeners, don't be strangers. We're here if you need to have a talk. So I'm about to read some words that I wrote down after a particularly nasty job some years ago, and it's reflecting on that incident. If I build a picture, it's just before Christmas, and it was just another typical, dare we say, day at work with the British Transport Police that would have some serious consequences. It's something called Dirty Curtains, and I'll read it to you now. I pulled up outside another house. The day had been so long. I straightened my jacket and adjusted my tie. Not sure, hat off or on. Dirty curtains twitched as I walked up to the door. Curious neighbours that want to know more. I took a deep breath as I rang on the bell. No one will ever understand this living hell. A wife answered the door, and the kids shout, "Is Daddy home?" I delivered those fatal words. She was now all alone. I reached out to support her as her legs went weak, and I saw the tears running down her cheeks. "You'd better come in." The dirty curtains are twitching. I entered the house and we sat in the kitchen. Christmas was near, now just days away. The ghost of Christmas past visited me that day. He shook my hand, thanked my partner and I, wished us the best for Christmas, as I questioned why. As officers of the law, it was our duty to inform. He was a victim of society, another young life forlorn. The train claimed his life. He had been struggling a while. The stress of life took away his smile. Here now I stand in the midst of time, looking down on his family, his children like mine. The presents piled high, the Christmas tree lights flicker. The wife still sobbing, now a lonely figure. The question I dread from the eldest son, where is my dad? Where has he gone? The second son asks, when is Dad coming home? I realise with sadness they are now all alone. A little fragile angel looking up at me, she's bathed by the lights of the Christmas tree. She asks again, is Daddy coming home? The answer I must give, I wanted to postpone. I took her hand and we walked to the front door. She'd never been afraid or lonely before. We looked up to the sky and gazed at the stars. I tried my hardest to heal her scars. The brightest stars twinkled. And that's your daddy up there. It seemed like a lifetime as we stand and stare. That's Daddy up there, making sure you're okay. I'm now lost for words, not sure what to say. The eldest son, he didn't understand. The youngest son stood and held my hand. The little princess was so dazed and confused, a wife distraught, acceptance refused. I heard a tap on the window as I walked through the front door. It's the angelic little princess. I wish I could do more. She held in her hand a Christmas card. I felt so blessed. On it, a stick man, a policeman's badge upon his chest. I went back inside and scooped her up in my grasp. When's Daddy coming home? She still needed to ask. Tears streamed from my eyes as I tried to be brave. As I looked at the family of a dad we couldn't save. I now need to deliver the news to his mum. I knocked on the door, still feeling quite numb. She attacked me with rage and punched me in the chest as I tried to console her mother, her son now at rest. She blamed us all as he got no help for the trauma he went through and the anguish he felt. You took no notice and now he's dead. Tears fall again as I bow my head. 3 days before Santa came to call, I delivered the news that ruined it all. I showed her the card that her granddaughter drew from the love of the innocent and a heart so true. As carol singers sing and jingle bells ring, what more sorrow could that cold night bring? Are you free to take an immediate grade call? Dirty curtains still twitched. I carried on and stood tall.